Podcasting.
Hey, welcome to episode number 26 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast, recorded June 19th, 2019. My name's Eric. I'm the host of the show. I'm based in Southern Ontario. I'm a hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator, VE3 EPN, and computer geek. I got into preparedness when I was working in frontline emergency services and witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events such as ice storms, power outages, etc. I started a small preparedness company that helped people get prepared and be able to look after themselves for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
I'm Alan. My friends and family call me a safety nerd. My background as a first responder has developed my mind for safety. I teach first aid, coach family and friends to be better prepared. I'm a locksmith by trade. I've worked in the physical security industry for more than 20 years now.
And my name is Hughes. Hello from Canada's East Coast. I'm a Canadian Forces veteran, current first responder, and I'm also a licensed private pilot with float endorsement and a sports shooter and sports shooter and hunter. Sorry.
No problem. People will notice that Ian is missing this evening. He decided that the droves of fans, he just couldn't deal with it. So he's out and about doing his thing, something about high heels and roosters and such. So
Ian is missing, but we're not missing Ian.
Shots fired. So we've got some igniting content for you in this episode. We're going to start off with some news articles relating to preparedness in the outdoors. Next, we'll be letting you know how we've improved our preparedness since our last episode. And then we're getting to the main topic for this episode, fire prevention.
I found an exceptionally short article, possibly the shortest news piece I've ever seen published. It's a small fire in southeastern Manitoba, a community I've never heard of, Steinbach, somebody correct me on how that's pronounced. It was a fire that started in the middle of the night. It was started by a compressor overheating in a refrigerator. I found that topical because it goes to show that fires can happen anywhere, anytime, for any reason. And it's a good idea to wait, be prepared for it.
Oh, there it is.
That's all I got.
Awesome. Hughes, do you have an article?
I do, yeah. So one that I wanted to share was recently there's been a lot of talk in Canada about the current Liberal government banning certain types of firearms, and the word on the street was that they were going to do this through an order in council, which didn't require them to pass a bill through the Senate and whatnot. And the latest news on that is that the Liberals are now, I guess, backtracking and shying away from possibly banning handguns, more likely looking to ban assault rifles, or assault weapons is what they're calling them, probably like AR-15. And the most surprising piece of news to me is that they're looking to possibly do a buyback. And even offering up to $1,500 per rifle, which would cost taxpayers around $300 million. So one thing that kind of was an interest to me is that the order in council was something that was supposed to come in early June. Now the Liberals are saying that because the government is going to be standing up soon and they're not going to sit down again until after the election in October, that likely nothing will happen until then. So we'll have to see what happens during the election and who comes out victorious to see if any of these threats will actually come to fruition for the Liberals. So just some interesting news. I know a lot of preppers are probably firearm owners as well, so that's what I wanted to share there.
That's going to be interesting to see exactly how they play that out, or if they're going to backpedal on everything, or what actually happens. But certainly,
my biggest fear has always been that my guns will be sold for what I told my wife I paid for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't be
$1,500 a gun. That doesn't go very far, especially when you're talking about ARs.
Oh, this is true. So I've got a couple of articles in here. So I've got one from the city of Edmonton in regards to an audit report finds that gaps in the city's emergency plan. So if you have a chance to breeze it over, links are in the show notes. But basically, it turns out they did an audit, and it looks like they needed to actually define specific roles for specific people. So I guess they ran through a bit of a dry run and realized that people weren't 100% sure of what it is they were supposed to be doing. So they're looking at actually defining roles. So I figured that's something that we could take a lesson out of. If you're putting a plan together for your household or for your family or your workplace or wherever you're putting a plan together for, maybe having some basic defined rules or roles would be of assistance, and that way, you're not assuming that your significant other is doing something and vice versa. It's just you already know that you have to do this one set thing. You both do your set jobs, and away you go. So I figured that'd be a useful one to have people look over and kind of get the wheels turning. I had a couple actually sent in.
And also have a plan for what.
Yeah, go ahead.
Also, make sure that you have a plan if you're going to do that. Have a plan for what happens if that one person is incapacitated.
Yep, have a backup.
Or it doesn't show up.
Yep. Absolutely. And I've got a couple here that actually were sent in by a listener who requested to stay anonymous. So, of course, we're going to respect that request. But they did send in a couple of articles that are actually quite good ones. One is in regards to the Toronto Raptors Parade in downtown Toronto the other day. I believe it was Monday evening. There's actually the cell phone networks were overloaded. So I
don't know if it's my end or your end, but I'm getting absolutely terrible reception.
Oh,
I'm good here.
Hughes, you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So in regards to the Raptor Parade, there was cell phone networks were overloaded. So kind of a good time to see what would actually happen in a scenario where there's a whole lot of people. I think it was estimated about 2 million people down by Nathan Phillips Square. All, of course, have their mobile devices, and the networks were overloaded. So link is in the show notes for that. But a couple of the providers had indicated that they were seeing almost 10 times their normal volume, especially down the Nathan Phillips Square area, and that definitely networks such that support the data network were overloaded and were not operating as they would expect, but they were looking at 10 times the volume of people on the network to begin with. So just something to keep in mind. We've been saying that for a couple episodes now, that if you're in a grid down type of situation, everybody's hopping on their cell phones, likely they might get overloaded. Seems like that is a possibility, but depends on how many people you got out and about as well. And then another one in regards to 50 million people without power in Argentina and Uruguay, but not Venezuela. So that article goes to talk about how the power was out for that many people. And it does mention that they don't suspect any kind of cyber terrorism, but they're also not ruling it out, which kind of ties into our one listener there who emailed us an episode or two ago in regards to doing like a cybersecurity type of episode. It's a possibility, right? Could happen. All the power grids are all hooked up.
There's a whole
to,
movie about that. There
is, yep. But it's certainly a threat, and certainly something we got to think about. It's a possibility, right? Power outage could be caused by all kinds of things, and yes, cyber terrorism could be one of them. So another interesting article to just have a look at, and like I said, they're all up in the show notes. So check them out and have a read. Let's move into what we've done lately for our preps. So for myself, today finished the first aid training, so I'm good for another 3 years, including tourniquet. So the training that we do at work includes tourniquet training, Israeli bandages, standard first aid like level C, adult, infant, child type of CPR, all that good stuff. So good to go again for another 3 years. So
awesome, good stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. I've been spending a lot of time working the last 6 or 7 days, focusing a lot on yard work. I've got water that runs into my house, so I'm redirecting it away from the foundation. It's an old property, and the road's been built up, so the road kind of slopes down to my yard. So I've been focusing on that because I'm kind of tired of water in my basement. So also getting ready for a cross-country tour. I'm taking the kids out east in a couple of days or a couple of weeks for a 4-day camping spectacular is what we're calling it. I'll be out in rural New Brunswick, which is the New Brunswick part of New Brunswick, and getting some family, some good quality family time, but got to figure out how to survive 20 hours in the car first.
Good stuff. For myself, this is something I do twice annually. I repacked my bug out bag and my get home bag. So the bug out bag essentially is the one that I keep at home, in case I have to leave the home for whatever natural emergency or disaster is happening. So I did that, and then I did the get home bag, which is a much smaller bag that I keep in my truck. And basically that just consists of going through the whole bag, unpacking it, looking at what needs to be updated, like typically batteries, batteries, energy bars and all that kind of stuff, refresh all that, and then change out the clothing and whatnot, because obviously it's not cold weather here anymore, so I have an opportunity to lighten the bag for the warmer months. So that's an exercise I do twice a year. I'll be doing it in the fall to update the bag to the winter state, so to speak. And then I also took an opportunity to go through. I have a trauma kit in my truck as well as a defibrillator. So I made sure that the battery was good on that. Went through all the meds and all that kind of stuff, make sure all that stuff was still good. So did that on Saturday. It took me probably 3 or 4
I thought
hours
I
to
was
do
a nerd.
everything. So yeah, that's what I did this past week there.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll move into
Saturday.
the main topic of the show. Let the two
All right, fire safety.
take over.
So, man, where do we start? Fire safety. Prevention always better than cure, of course. I think everybody's probably familiar with the threats, right? You need, fire. Fire's a good servant, but a bad master. So as long as we've got it under control, fire is our friend. Provides heat, cooks our food, provides light, keeps the boogeyman away. All of those wonderful things. But under when it's not controlled under the wrong conditions, it can be absolutely devastating. We're seeing on the West Coast there are all kinds of brush fires and wildfires that are happening. So one of the big things, most preppers are outdoorsy types or have plans to be outdoorsy types. So keep your fire contained. Most brush fires or wildfires start by embers spreading. That happens when your fuel load, right? Your flame, your visible flame, and the embers get high up above your containment area. So if you've got you've dug a hole, you've got a fire pit, you've got, surrounded by rocks, whatever. If those embers get up above that level, they get carried by the wind. You get enough embers and enough dry material around you, enough dry fuel, then you've got a condition for a big fire that you can't control. So that's kind of one of those number one prevention tips is don't start wildfires. They don't do any good. If you can keep your fire small, keep it contained. The Dakota fire is actually a really good one for being outdoors because it digs right down under the root system, and it makes it very difficult to get too big. So that's one thing there. Within your home, garage, or building, your walls, floors, and ceilings can become fire separations. The way that modern houses and modern buildings are built is that drywall becomes the fire separation. So drywall is made of gypsum, which releases heat slowly, or absorbs heat slowly, releases moisture, and doesn't burn. It will eventually crumble, but it doesn't burn. It gives you multiple hours of fire rating. A couple of things to note. One of the things that I learned, and we can go back to the conspiracy episode of, going back way back with the tinfoil episode. Wood studs, when they're exposed to heat, will burn, but in most cases they will char and then stop. Steel, however, steel studs, it's true that they won't melt, but they weaken very quickly. So it only takes a couple hundred degrees for a steel stud to become weak, and then when you add the load of the house on top of it, they can cause collapse a lot faster. So that's one of the things to be aware of with building construction.
And if I could just add to that, Alan, we have in my community here as a firefighter as well, we have a lot of two types of construction. So we have the older style balloon type construction for the homes. Typically, most of these are true dimensional lumber. Those are the ones that take a lot longer to collapse because it takes a lot longer for the fire to eat through all that wood and all that kind of stuff. Homes like mine, for example, which is a new lightweight construction, they're stronger in a lot of aspects, but not when it comes to taking heat. So for example, the engineered trusses I have in my attic, they're basically laminated OSB that are held with gusset plates. So basically what happens is that when heat is applied to these, the actual you'll have a delamination of the beams, which basically means that they structurally fail a lot quicker. So for new construction, when it's exposed to heat and fire, typically we give it 5 to 7 minutes before there's a collapse. Whereas with the older homes that have this true dimensional lawn lumber, this framing and boarding on the outside of the homes, you're looking at upwards of 15 to 20 minutes before you have a collapse, even more. So you really have to understand, what you're going into, what type of construction you're dealing with and whatnot. And again, I mean, it could be stronger, more wind resistant. but it's definitely not more fire resistant.
And it's another kind of small point, but it's an important one, that like older homes were built with true dimensional lumber, so it's physically larger, but it also tends to be old growth lumber. And old growth lumber is denser, so it takes longer to actually set it alight, for it to actually start combusting than the newer younger stuff. So like the joist in my the studs in my 135-year-old house are all super dense, super tight, not like super tight, whereas the new studs that I'm seeing, and I mean I work in the lumber industry, and you'll get maybe 5 or 10 years of growth rings as opposed to 50 or 60 years of growth rings. So it changes the density of the wood a lot, which also, the less dense the wood, the faster it'll burn.
Yeah, it's all cheap pine, right? So
yeah, and well, I mean, it's not even pine. Well, it's pine, I guess. It's spruce. Like it's a very lightweight. It's very light, very open cell. Like I mean, when we're getting down to the cellular level, it'll all burn a whole lot faster than the older stuff that's kicking around. So, depending on when your house was built, what it was built from, you've got a huge potential problem. So let's talk about what to do about that. Number one, I mean, assess your threats. What causes fires in your house? You've got to apply heat. I mean, I think everybody who's a prepper understands the fire triangle, and I won't get into the fire tetrahedron because we just don't have enough time. But the fire triangle is the basic fuel, oxygen, heat source, fuel, oxygen, ignition source, and you have to take away one of those to put the fire out. You have to have all three to create a fire. You have to take one of those away to put the fire out. So, what in your house can cause those three things to happen? Well, we've always got air in the house. There's no such thing as a house with a vacuum. House that is a vacuum, although all houses have vacuums. There's fuel loads everywhere. I mean, we've got from our cooking oil to the studs and the floors and the furniture. Everything is fuel, and then you've got heat sources. You have your hot water tanks and your furnaces and wood stoves and your ranges and ovens and microwaves, and all of those things can become a source of ignition. So the risk is there, and depending on how you do things, your risk may be higher, your risk may be lower, but the risk is always there. So number one is keep everything up to date, right? Like have your stuff inspected. Make sure that it's all in good working condition, especially chimneys. Ian left kind of a list of questions. One of them was about wood stoves. Wood stoves, chimneys specifically are the big one. Anytime you've got a smoke buildup, you've got carbon monoxide problems, but something that is often not considered if you're not part of the fire service is that smoke in itself is combustible. Smoke is fuel. So if you get too much buildup of smoke and then the right combination of oxygen and heat, that can become what is often referred to as a backdraft or a flashover or a smoke explosion, depending on the circumstances. But things can go south really, really quickly. So keep your chimneys clean, keep the exhaust clean. As long as that's working, then you should be all right. What else you got for me, Hughes? You've been doing this longer than I have.
Yeah, so I mean, for the average homeowner, a couple tips that I preach here, and these are ones that are not very expensive to do. So if you have a 2-story home, do yourself a favor, go to a place like Home Depot or Canadian Tire or whatnot. You can get a collapsible ladder or rope ladder that you can hang out of the window, and yeah, you can jump out of the window. But this is how you break legs and all that kind of stuff, right? So for $50 or $60, get one of these ladders. You can get out safely from a second story. This is if your house is already on fire. Another thing is that extinguishers are expensive. You get a dry chem extinguisher that's 10 or 20 pounds. You're looking upwards of $100. So what I did, and this could be a good tip for a lot of people here, is look on places like Kijiji, look at places that do used building supplies and whatnot, and you could find used, oftentimes spent dry chemical extinguishers, and you could pick them up for 10 or 20 bucks a piece, bring them to a place like Tyco Safety, and you can have them refilled for 25 to 30 bucks each. So for an investment of about 40 bucks, you've got, a 10 or 20 pound dry chem extinguisher. And to give you an idea, I mean, I can put out a fairly substantial fire. I'm talking about a contents fire in a room with just a 5-pound extinguisher, right? If you know how to use a dry chem extinguisher, 5 pounds will go a long way. 10 or 20 pounds is a lot of firepower, right? So what I did is I ended up investing about $200 to buy a couple used extinguishers. I got them refilled and safety checks and whatnot at Tyco Safety. There's a lot of companies in your area that probably do this kind of stuff. And I put one in, one in the kitchen, one in the basement, one in the garage, one in our bedroom. And then I keep one in the truck as well. I keep a 20-pound in a truck. So that gives you the ability to, wherever you are in a house, have substantial firefighting power with just that 10 or 20-pound extinguisher. And then if you live in a rural area like I do, two things that I've done, and these are a little bit more involved, but I've gotten a set of sprinklers, and what this is basically it's 10 sprinklers that you place around your property, and you can feed them from your municipal water source if you have enough. But I'm on a well, so I can't. But there's a stream next to me. So what I did is I bought a used wick pump, and what a wick pump is basically just a firefighting pump that runs off a 2-cycle engine. They're pretty expensive new. You're probably talking $3 to $4 grand, but you can pick them up used, oftentimes on government surplus sites. So I picked one of those up, and that 2-cycle wick pump is able to feed this sprinkler system that I can put around my property. And the purpose of that is that if there's a forest fire in the area, what I can do is I can use the sprinkler system to either direct the water at my house to douse it with water, so that if the fire comes near my property, any embers that land on my roof, which is shingles, or on my siding, which is vinyl, because of the water that's raining down on the house, the embers won't actually catch the house on fire. So everything around my house might burn, but hopefully my house will be spared. The other thing I can do is I can direct the sprinklers to basically spray the edge of the woods around my forest, or sorry, the edge of the woods around my property, which means that if a fire does come near the property, it would hit this very wet, very damp section, and hopefully get slowed down enough or stopped before it even reaches my property. So this is something that, for $400, you can buy this set of 10 sprinklers. And then if you could find yourself a wick pump, I mean, you sell these things at places like Princess Auto in Canada or Harbor Freight in the US. You can pick up these firefighting pumps, these gas-powered firefighting pumps, if you have a water source, for relatively cheap. If you get them at Princess Auto or whatnot, you're looking at like $400 or $500. And that gives you the ability to protect your property in the event of a forest fire, or if you're looking at stuff inside, like I said, you don't have to go buy brand new gear. You can buy used extinguishers and get them recertified, get them refilled, and they're going to be just as good as buying the new stuff.
Well, that leads me to another point. Especially if you live in an area that's threatened by wildfires, make sure that your property is clear. I know Ian's been talking about that for the last few months. That's a lot of what he's been doing, is clearing as much space as he can, so he's got as much area between his house and the fuel as possible. Because if you can have a 30 to 50 foot stretch of just rocks and things that won't burn, and then you've got another bare patch of grass, and then you've got forest. It's nice to live directly in the trees, but it's less nice when those trees catch fire and then by extension burn your house down. So
yeah, and the thing too, you've got to think about, like when I picked my house, I picked it because that's what I could afford at the time, not necessarily because that's exactly the house that I wanted. So having vinyl siding means that if a forest fire comes close enough to my house, the embers don't actually have to touch the house in order to catch on fire. The radiant heat of the fire could catch the siding on fire, or actually, sorry, it would melt the siding. The siding would catch on fire, and then the rest of the house would go, right? So, I mean, ultimately, the house is insured, the possessions are insured, and all that kind of stuff. But whatever I could do to limit the damage, for a few $100s, you can get the peace of mind of, hopefully being able to prevent your house from being consumed by fire.
It's great to have insurance, but it's a whole lot better to not have your house burned down in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, those are some tips that you don't have to start off with 5 extinguishers. Even if you just start off with 1, and you make it easily accessible, everybody in the house that can use it knows how to use it, so that they can effectively put out a constant fire, is probably a great step. I mean, as a firefighter myself, I go to a lot of calls and a lot of homes that the homeowners don't have working smoke alarms. They don't have fire extinguishers in a home and all that kind of stuff. So really, like that's another thing that we have. So we have wired in, because it's code here where I live, and probably across most of Canada, is I have
Ontario is the same way.
Okay, so wired in smoke detectors that have a battery backup. And then we have one that's centrally monitored by our alarm company. And then I went one step further and I installed a ionizing smoke detector in each one of the kids' rooms. So even though there's one in the hallway, having one in each one of your children's rooms or each one of the bedrooms gives you a couple more minutes, hopefully, warning if a fire does start in one of those rooms. And although I've tried to remove any ignition source from those bedrooms, there's still electrical outlets. There's always a possibility of something shorting out or whatnot. And starting a fire in the room. And I think having a relatively inexpensive smoke alarm. I mean, you could pick up 2 packs at Costco for $20. Install them in the room, and it will buy you a couple extra minutes if there is a fire that starts in one of those rooms, especially if the bedrooms have doors that are closed at night, right?
That was two more that you already did 2 more points. So one is to keep your doors closed. What we know about doors closed is that it will slow the spread of fire. It will slow the spread of smoke. So smoke is the far bigger threat in any kind of compartmentalized fire like that. It displaces oxygen, and that's what kills us. More than burns and heat. So that's a really important thing: is keep your doors closed. It will minimize the spread. And the other point was talk with your insurance provider and your local fire department. And there's a really good chance. My insurance company came through earlier this year and left three additional CO detectors and 2 additional smoke detectors that I didn't specifically think I had a use for, but he said the more the merrier, and
Yeah,
I
that's
can't
a
really
great
argue
point.
that point.
I know my fire department here. We do a lot of community outreach. I mean, if we go to a call, we notice that somebody doesn't have a working smoke alarm. And it's not because they don't want to have one, but it might be because that's not something that they can afford right then. We keep some spare ones on the truck that we'll happily install inside of their home, right? And
We
if
do
it's something
exactly
that
the same thing. Yep.
yeah, if it's something that we think that fire prevention can come in and do a little bit more help, like install more smoke detectors than what we have on the truck and all that kind of stuff, and most fire departments do this. I know at least in the province of Nova Scotia, this is a thing that we go out, do public education, all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't hurt if you need a smoke alarm and it's not in your budget right now. Call your fire department, call your local counselor, and see if there's something that the municipality can do to help you when it comes to that kind of stuff, right? That's a great point, Alan.
Yeah, so that's one of those life-saving things that is just like it's worth it. I mean, if find a way, whether it's whether you make room in your budget for it, or whether you reach out to the resources that you have, because there are resources available, but make sure that you have that. I want to hit back on extinguishers. We talked about extinguishers. There are a whole bunch of different types. I mean, there are a few basic ways to put out a fire. Right? We talked about that fire triangle. It's actually part of our logo. We've got the triangle around the fire. So a few basic ways to put out the fire. You need to either exclude the oxygen. You need to cool it to a point where there's no longer enough heat to sustain it, or you need to remove the fuel. Your basic bucket of water on a fire, that's cooling it to a point where it's no longer where it's below the ignition temperature. Anytime, all of your cookware, and we talked about cast iron in the last episode, but all of your cookware, make sure you have a properly fitting lid for it. If something catches fire, put the lid on. There are a million videos out there of what happens when you put water on a grease fire. Don't do it. Don't try. Actually, I tried to ignite a grease fire for the video for this product that I'm about to talk about. Found it exceptionally difficult, but I also know how hard it is to put out a grease fire. So don't put water on a grease fire. Exclude the oxygen. Put the lid on it. If you put the lid on it, it burns itself out really, really quickly. So if you've got a good fitting lid for all of your cookware, that's a really easy way to make a potentially enormous problem into a minor inconvenience. We talked about having fire extinguishers. Where you put them in your house, make sure that where you're putting them is between your biggest threat and the exit, so that you're not backing yourself into a corner trying to find your fire extinguisher, discover that you can't put it out with what you have, and then you get trapped. So make sure that you've always got a route of escape before you try and fight a fire. And that brings us to Canadian Prepper Podcast, very first product review. Here we are.
Yep.
So this is a really cool thing that I found. I let's see what we can see there. This is called Stop Fire, not Fire Stop, Stop Fire, by a Canadian distributor is called Reynold Max. The show notes have a link to them. This stuff is pretty cool. This is what we call an AFFF extinguisher. So this is rated for solids, liquids, live electrical circuits, and Class K fires, which is cooking grease fires. AFFF is aqueous film forming foam, which I learned recently you have to be able to say 5 times fast in order to pass the firefighter certification. Aqueous film forming foam is one of the most efficient ways to put out the biggest number of fires possible. So this is the very same stuff that we carry on fire trucks, in approximately 3%. 3% concentration for all those nerds out there that know about things like that. This, however, is air. So the difference between this and like a dry chemical extinguisher is that this is an aerosol. So with a dry chem extinguisher, you squeeze it once, it has to be recharged no matter what. With this, it has about a 20-second discharge time, 19 to 20-second discharge time. I just need a little spray, a little spritz, like a can of hairspray, and hairspray is where I went with that, not cooking spray, not WD-40. I gotta go back. I gotta take that back and go WD-40. Some kind of lubricant.
The high heels you were wearing last episode.
So, like a can of lubricant, it just needs a little spritz, and then the rest of the material inside is still good. So, I'll put a couple of videos up on the YouTube channel of me putting this out. I took it out to the backyard. There's really terrible cell phone camera footage of me, trying to light a grease fire, and then eventually just setting some paper on fire and putting it out with this foam. And it's super fast. It's super efficient. It puts out fires in a lot of ways, but yeah, it's really cool. And super bonus. So if you go to their website, again, it's in the show notes, but it's reynoldmax.com. Sorry, reynoldmax.net. The Canadian distribution is from a couple of people in Quebec. They're actually firefighters as well. Met them at a conference. They're super nice people. They were really cool to send us this out and let us review it. And they have given us and the listeners a discount code. So if you go to their site and you want to buy this, you can buy this off the shelf at Lowe's and Rona. Is their retail distribution, or you can go to their website at reynoldmax.net, which is REINOLDMAX.net. Go to the buy online, go to their check. When you check out, enter the coupon code CPP10, that's Canadian Prepper Podcast 10, and that'll get you 10% off your purchases of the really fantastic AFFF Fire Stop Fire. Something else that's kind of cool about this, I like this, but again, it's because I'm nerdy. Comes with a wall mount. The wall mount actually glows in the dark. So if I'm trying to find it in a hurry, the lights are off, the power's out, I can still find it pretty quickly. So that I'll put it back here in a dark corner. You can see that it's glowing there. So that's kind of neat that it actually comes in that. There's a larger size as well for larger fires. About the only thing that I would caution on this, and it says it in the product information on the website as well, is that because it is an aqueous base, right? It is a water-based solution. Don't leave it in your car in the winter because it will freeze. And
I was reading up on the product, Alan. I noticed that for some reason it's prohibited in Alberta. So I don't know why. It's prohibited in
Alberta. I was reading why. It's because there's no specific classification for it.
Got it.
There's a classification for dry chem. There's a classification for wet chem, but there's no classification for a stored pressure AFFF. And so because there's no classification, it doesn't fall within any specific rule. So it's not that it's prohibited from use. It's just that it's not approved for use in Alberta.
Or approved for sale.
So I wouldn't say it's prohibited for sale. It's just you can't use it in a place where it's mandated. So at home where there's no mandate for a fire extinguisher, then you can use that. But if you were in a workplace, there's no. Then it wouldn't meet Alberta's standard for it, and that's a temporary issue. They've gotten approval in a lot of other places. Something that I found kind of interesting about this is that it's actually Lithuanian. There's not a whole lot of industry in Lithuania, but that's one of the things that comes out of there. And it's been this particular setup has been in use across the pond in Europe for 15 to 20 years. So it's got a pretty significant track record. I mean, in my rather limited experience of putting out fires, I'm impressed with how quickly it put it out. So I'll put the video up on the YouTube channel. I'll get that up this afternoon after we're done recording, and
Awesome.
that's kind of cool. So that's kind of our first product review, and it's a really neat product. And Benoit, who's the distributor there, he's one of the firefighters that distributes this. He's been super helpful answering all my questions, and he's one of those people that just wants this product in people's hands to use because he knows that it works.
Yeah,
So, they have a couple of cool videos. There are a few videos out there if you want to find them on their website. They've got a few videos of them putting out grease fires really quickly. Turns out I'm either a really excellent firefighter or a really poor fire lighter, because I was not able to get a grease fire going. But I ended up just lighting some paper on fire, putting it in the pan, and putting that out, and you can see how quickly it goes out. So
I just
that's a pretty slick thing.
Just want to mention another point too. I know that in our area here, so there's a lot of new construction, and we do a lot of pre-planning for this new construction, and we go in as the homes are being built to understand the construction, the layout, just to have an idea of what we could be faced with if we get a call there. And one thing I've noticed is a lot of their new homes, the developers are putting in sprinkler systems in these homes. And I was asking some of the developers questions about it, and they said, it's about a $1,200 option in a new construction. It's a lot more expensive to retrofit an existing home. The great thing about this is that it'll run off your well or your municipal water supply. The actual heads, so the sprinkler heads, actually are hidden inside the ceiling, and there's these little plastic caps that are basically that you can paint. So you can paint the plastic caps, and what happens is that once they sense heat, they actually push down through the plastic cap. And then they'll put out a content or room fire. And I do see the old Hollywood thing that if one sprinkler goes, they all go, right? And that's not true. Each one of the sprinkler heads are individually controlled or set off. So I mean, if you have one sprinkler head per room or two per room, depending on the size, if you have a content fire in that room, once you get enough heat, the sprinkler head will pop down through the plastic cap, put out the content fire, typically before the fire department even gets there, right? So it does limit the amount of damage that a fire can do. Now you're going to have water damage, but you'd have that anyway if the fire department shows up and actually, puts out the fire and all that kind of stuff. So, I thought for a new home construction for $1,200, that's really not a bad deal. And they were saying too that a lot of the people building these new homes are getting discounts from their insurance of up to about 15 to 20% because of the fact that they're installing the sprinkler system. So although, it's a $1,200 expense up front, when you're talking about homes that are $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, it's really not that big of a cost. And the fact that you could save 15 to 20% on your home insurance costs because you are sprinklered, that's something to think about, right? So
absolutely,
it's certainly becoming a lot more prevalent. Just as an aside, if you go to those builders, most of them are more than happy to give you the plans for their models.
Yep.
They only build 5 or 6 models at a time, and that way you can tell from the outside for the most part what models you've got, and you've got the floor plan. So,
and I think
just kind of an aside there.
The biggest revelation to me in the construction is that my parents-in-law, their home is about 30 years old, and they basically have solid wood boards on the outside. I've got OSB, which is oriented strand board, which is basically like sheets of plywood essentially, and the new homes have nothing. So you basically have your vinyl siding, you have your 1-inch foam board, and then you have your 2x6 construction, which basically has insulation in it, and then you got drywall on the other side. There's the vapor barrier piece as well, but essentially I could break through a house with an X-Acto knife because I just cut the vinyl siding, I cut the foam, I rip out the insulation, I cut the drywall, and I'm through the wall. What you would typically need either an axe or a saw to get through either the boards or the plywood. You don't need that anymore because a lot of these homes don't have it. It's a way for them to save costs and add insulation, because by adding a 1-inch foam board, it's more insulating than plywood. But yeah, it's why bust down a door when you can break in with an X-Acto knife? So that was interesting as well.
So that just destroy our lock picking episode.
Somewhat, yeah.
It certainly is a valid point. Another kind of thing, and you mentioned the OSB. So the oriented strand board is essentially chips of wood held together with glue. And you alluded to it earlier, Hughes, that OSB and like modern construction, because of that, because they're using such high contents of glue and low contents of, solid lumber, your house burns a whole lot faster.
Yeah. Again, I mean,
Um,
structurally, OSB is strong. I mean,
oh,
it's
it's
strong
fantastic! It's
stuff,
fantastic.
but as soon as
Yeah,
it's exposed to
until
heat,
it gets hot.
it
Yeah,
delaminates, right? And that's the
yeah.
problem with it. So
Yeah, so it's just something to be aware of, that if you're, especially in your basement, if your floor joists are OSB, it's not a bad idea, especially around your furnace and your water heater, anything fuel burning in the basement. Put a couple of layers of drywall up to slow down the heating process.
yep, yep.
All right, guys. So maybe a couple of newbie questions here for you, just because I know nothing about fire prevention or anything like that. And I'm sure a lot of listeners out there, same boat. Any recommendations for fire extinguisher size for just like your regular general household?
You know what? I'm probably going to go with 5 pounds. 5 pounds is manageable for both people of large and small stature, I guess, right? It's easy to wield. I think 5 pounds is probably the ideal size. 10 and 20 pounds, you have a lot more firefighting power, so to speak. I mean, you're literally doubling or quadrupling the amount of dry chem that you have in there, right? But at the same time, I think 5 pounds is a good number. I know, Alan. What do you think about that?
Yep, I think that's a reasonable number. This guy here, again, go back to our stop fire can. This is, in a 500 gram container, is equivalent to a 3 pound fire extinguisher, like a 3 pound dry chem.
That's really good.
So that's, I mean, you can, and this is literally like this, the size of a can of lubricant, a can of cooking spray, a can of whatever, right? It weighs it weighs 500 grams. It weighs like a quarter of a pound. And that's all, that's all it takes to put out, a fairly substantial fire. Like a 3 pound extinguisher will do enough to at least buy you time to get out, or whatever it might be. But I think a 5 pound would probably be the max for the average user.
Yeah.
If you've practiced with it or drilled with it at all, then a 10 pound might be worth it. The biggest challenge with the larger extinguishers, it tends to give people the confidence that that they have more time, which, if you're not prepared for it for the fire to not go out, can put you in a position where now you're covered in dry chemicals, there's less oxygen in the atmosphere, and the room is still on fire, and you've been there for 15 or 20 more seconds.
Fair enough.
And I just want to mention on the extinguishers too, and I know so the one thing is that if you have a dry chem, make sure that every couple of weeks or every couple months that you kind of flip it upside down, flip it back, because what happens is that dry chem powder, if it's not agitated or moved after a while, it becomes like a solid concrete block in there. And what I've seen happen is that, when the extinguishers are not serviced regularly, or, flipped around to get the dry chem powder to move inside the extinguisher, when it becomes a solid block of concrete, the gauge will read it still has pressure in there, but people will pull the pin, depress the handle, and that essentially just air will come out, because essentially you're releasing the pressure, but it's not able to suck the dry chem powder through the tube. So what I do is I take my 5, 10, and 20 pound extinguishers, and I basically flip them upside down. I'll put my ear to it so that I can actually hear the powder moving within the extinguisher, and I know that at that point it hasn't become a solidified block of concrete. And full transparency, I don't have my personal extinguishers reserviced every year, but I'm also not obligated to have them here in my home. So I just do the service on them myself by making sure that the gauge is still showing pressure, and just flipping them over a few times just to get that dry chem powder agitated.
And so if you do flip them over and you don't hear that powder moving around, it's time to take them in and get serviced.
It's not. No, what you can do is you can take a rubber mallet. Don't take a steel mallet. Take a rubber mallet and just kind of bang it lightly, and hopefully that'll loosen the powder up. And then what you can do is just try flipping again to see if you can actually hear that powder. That usually works. I haven't seen that not work. But yeah, if you do all of that and you still can't hear it, it's probably time to have it serviced at that point.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Then for those traveling in vehicles, or want to have an extinguisher in a vehicle, is there a certain type that you guys recommend people be carrying in the vehicle?
Dry chem again. I mean, you can't carry water, because especially in climates like ours, it's going to freeze in the wintertime. CO2 is just not right for vehicle fires. I would say I would stick with just the basic ABC dry chem extinguisher.
Yeah, and then those can be left out in like extreme heat and extreme cold.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the dry chem extinguishers, that's what you see affixed to the outside of like garbage trucks and utility trucks and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, you see them in the extreme heat of the summer, you see them in the extreme cold of the winter. They are designed to, be outdoors. And I mean, you see the dry chem extinguishers are what you see at the gas stations, right? So
Right.
these things are enduring all these temperatures all year round, and they work fine.
Perfect. Now, I know we've mentioned a little bit in regards to refilling them. Cost-wise, beneficial to just have them refilled, or looking at just going out and buying new, or what would be your recommendation there?
Refill them, absolutely. As long as the outside is in good condition. I want to say it's every 10 years. They have to go through a hydrostatic test just to make sure that they haven't that the container hasn't been compromised. But it's absolutely worth it. It's $25 or $30 to have it refilled once it's been used. And something else that I often forget to mention is with those dry chem extinguishers, no matter what, as soon as you squeeze that handle, it has to be refilled. So if you're going to discharge that extinguisher, empty it. It's just one of those best practices. It's going to have to be refilled either way, so you might as well get your money's worth and discharge the whole thing. But around here, anyways, there are a couple of places that can do it. You'll lose access to it for a day or two, and $25 or $30 later, you've got a fire extinguisher that's ready to go again. And then I think it's every 10 years it has to be hydrostatically tested just to make sure that the container's not compromised. And at that point, it might be more economical to replace it, but obviously price it out, because it's going to vary by manufacturer and vary by size and vary by vendor as well.
Good to know. It's left on my list of questions here. As far as like a field expedient type of home extinguishing, say you don't have access to a fire extinguisher right away, other than water, what would be some ideas like baking soda or something like that?
Well, so you've got the fire triangle, right? You've got to either remove oxygen, remove heat, or remove fuel. A big bucket of water on a campfire puts out campfires pretty quick. For liquids, right? Your gas, your puddle of gasoline in the driveway. Cover up the liquid. Sand does a really good job of that. Fine gravel, and then smother it. Right? You can get rid of the if you can include the oxygen. We talked about having a tight fitting lid on for your cookware. That will help exclude the oxygen really quickly. So any of those are good. Baking soda in sufficient quantities should theoretically smother a fire, but you've got to have a whole lot of it and apply it really quickly in order for it to be beneficial.
All right. And
mostly buy a fire extinguisher.
Hey, can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I just had an audio issue.
All right. And then one other question, just in regards to CO detectors. I know we can get them here, like combination smoke and CO detector. Thoughts on those? Better to have them separate, combined?
I don't think there's a difference when you get it separate or combined. I mean, the two things I'll say about it is that if you have a source of carbon monoxide in your home, obviously it's a must-have, right? I mean, I have one in the garage just when I have the vehicles in there or small engines or anything like that. The other thing too is that these typically have a shelf life or usable life of about 10 years. And what we see a lot is that we get a lot of false alarms that are triggered by alarms like fire alarms or CO2 alarms that have gone past their 10 years. So they'll typically say either the date of manufacturer or like an expiry date. Just make sure you check that when you check the batteries and make sure that you replace it on or around the 10-year mark. Because the sensors
and same goes for smoke detectors.
Yeah, exactly.
That's mainly just because the sensor going bad with them.
Yeah, and it can trigger a lot of false alarms. And unfortunately, when these are connected to an alarm company, we respond. It's a false alarm. For the first one's free, and then the next one you get fined, right? So, cheaper to get a new smoke alarm than it is to pay the fine. So,
fair enough.
Around here, it's about $400 a response for that.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. Cheaper to replace the alarms. Do you guys have anything else you wanted to add in before I move into the podcast challenge?
No, not for me.
Keep your equipment up to snuff. Like if especially if you have like a wood stove or a wood or gas burning fireplace, make sure that service, especially if it's a wood stove, make sure that it seals properly. Carbon monoxide is, I mean, it's the silent killer, right? You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but it will kill you. It will kill you quickly. If you have any fuel burning appliances, then make sure that you have something. You have a CO detector, a smoke detector in the area where you congregate, and the closer between the source and you that it is, the more likely that it is to go off and alert you before it gets to a dangerous level. And it really doesn't take a whole lot of carbon monoxide to kill you. It displaces oxygen in your bloodstream. It stops your blood's ability to absorb oxygen, which starts killing off your tissues very, very quickly. So especially if you've got a wood stove, make sure it's serviced properly, make sure that it's exhausting properly, make sure that you have a detector, because frankly, it's just a stupid way to die.
Yeah, doesn't sound like any fun either.
No.
All right, let's move into the podcast challenge. So for this episode, we're going to say make sure the batteries are changed in all your detectors, whether they're CO2, smoke detectors, combination, whatever. Make sure the batteries are switched out, and then start doing that every daylight savings time change. That's a fairly standard thing. But we're also going to say try to make sure there's at least one fire extinguisher per floor in your house, and maybe one in the garage. Check on their serviceability as well, and start maybe servicing them once a month, like Hughes mentioned. Tip them upside down, just give them a listen, and then from there start to build out your fire suppression plan. So start out with the one extinguisher, and then maybe move to one more in another room, and just keep expanding it as you go. If you come up with some interesting spots to store them, let us know as well at feedback@preparedpodcast.ca.
I'm gonna add to that really quickly. When you're checking the batteries, make sure you check the expiry date on your smoke detectors and your CO alarms. Make sure that make sure they're still within their service range. The two risks are either that it's going to go off when it's not supposed to, which is not bad, or it's not going to go off when it is supposed to, and that's a really bad situation.
All right. And then when you do that, flip us an email at feedback@preparedpodcast.ca. Let us know some spots that you found to store a fire extinguisher, and maybe it's a spot that not everybody has thought of, but is a good idea. And then we can get that out to all listeners, and we can all start kind of exchanging ideas as to where to store them, besides the obvious spots of the most commonly used areas. So let's move into episode closing. So we've got a couple of upcoming events. We've still got the annual Preppers Meet coming up in Desboro, Ontario. Runs July 11th to 14th. You can check out the annualpreppersmeet.com for that and get your tickets. Just met up with Che, one of the organizers there today, and passed off some radios. So they've got some comms for this year's event. They were short a few, so they've got enough now that all their staff can communicate effectively. And also dropped off the water bob that Rapid Survival is donated for the raffle table. So make sure you get out there and check them out. It's always a good time. July the 6th, we got the Podcaster Charity Shoot out in Drumheller, Alberta. All are welcome. Some planned events include the Mapleseed course and a Stop the Bleed course, and of course the pig roast. And as Ian said last episode, not the dirty kind, the actual animal. So, and Ian will be out there for that, as well as Gavin from the other CPP there, the Canadian Patriot Podcast. So go out and say hello, meet the two of them in person. Another event here.
Learn some things.
Learn some things, exactly. Sign up for the Stop the Bleed course. Another thing here in Campbell River, BC, the Campbell River Gun Club, June 22nd, Project Mapleseed. They got a marksmanship course taught with 22s, all shot 25 yards, simulated up to 400 yards with small targets. June 23rd is the Canadian Rimfire Precision Series match. So you can check out rimfireprecision.ca/events for that. Also for the Project Mapleseed, we've got an Eventbrite link that is in the show notes. You can check out mapleseedrifleman.com. They were looking for a few more people to come out to that. So if you're in the area or looking for some sort of shooting event to get out to, you've got a couple on the list now. So check all those out. They're good events to get to. And do you guys have any other events or anything you want to get out?
No, not for me.
No, I'm not for me. I'm going to be heading to the East Coast coming up, and actually on that weekend of July 6th. So maybe maybe Hughes, you and I can get together for an afternoon. I'm going to be not terribly far away, so
For sure.
There you go. All right, let's move into some shout outs. I see, Alan, you're feverishly typing away there.
there's no time like the last minute to do that. So shout out to Benoit and the team at Reinhold Max. They sent this out to us. That's pretty awesome. I've got this one here for me. I've used part of it, but it's still completely usable. And I was able to send one on to Eric and one on to Ian. So that was pretty cool. So really appreciate you guys sending this to us. And look for this product at Lowe's, at Rona, or directly on their website. Save yourself a little bit of money. Remember the code CPP10 at checkout and save yourself 10%.
Awesome. Any shout outs for you, Hughes?
No, not for me. Thanks.
All right. So moving to email and iTunes. So as I mentioned up at the news article section, we did have one email since the last episode, just letting us know about a couple of news events that have happened. By all means, if you see news articles you think we should be covering, please send them in. Don't mind getting those emails at all. The person who emailed us requested to stay anonymous, which we will, of course, honor. So won't be naming any names there. And keep that in mind as well if you want to send an email into us.
On a totally unrelated note, hi, Steve.
Yeah, that's not the person's name we emailed, if anybody's wondering. But yeah, so
I have no idea. I'm just making that up. Yeah.
You know we're close, by the way. But yeah, you can email us and ask to stay anonymous. As far as iTunes reviews go, we're up to 26 5-stars. We've still got that one little guy at the 4-star, but don't worry about that little guy. He's just there. And then. And Podbean, nothing on Podbean since the last episode, and no new written reviews on iTunes either. So with that, I will bring episode number 26 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please help us out. Take a few minutes, submit a review, just not a 4-star. It helps us and other people find us. You can also find us at prepperpodcast.ca, and if you want to throw that 4-star in, go for it.
Awesome.
You're up.
Oh, that's me. Hey, we record these shows live on YouTube chats, which is actually what I was looking for to see if there was any comment there. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast. Click the notifications tab. That gives you an alert when we are going live. If you want to contact me directly, you can find me on Instagram at PPSWO.
And for myself, I can be reached via email at hfxprepper@gmail.com. And I've also got my own YouTube channel. Just search for HFX Prepper on YouTube.
Awesome. So please check out Rapid Survival at rapidsurvival.com. You can get me there on the live chat. You can also email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. So thanks for joining us. You can tune in for the next episode where we're going to be covering off everyday carry in a Canadian environment from a legal standpoint. That one's a mouthful, and I'm sure it's going to be a good one. So until next time, be prepared, stay safe. And that's you again, Alan.
And keep learning.
Thanks, everyone.